For Crema Media's Polity, I'm Sane Dlamini. South African activist Dale McKinley discusses his latest book titled South Africa's Corporatised Liberation, a critical analysis of the ANC in power. You say that the ANC has been working in the interest of business. What evidence do you offer of this assertion?
Well, actually, it's not an assertion. It's 22 years of factual information. Basically, I mean, it depends on how far back we want to go. Right from the beginning of the negotiations and the Constitution, there were compromises that were made, which the ANC has, in some cases, readily admitted, with business. So, for example, the biggest compromise was, you get political power, we keep economic power. Essentially, don't mess with the economy. That was the biggest compromise of all. As a result of that compromise, in other words, as a result of the ANC basically saying to corporate capital and business, we're not going to mess with you, we're not going to nationalize industry, we're not going to do what the Freedom Charter says or what we promised to do. As a result of that, over the last 22 years, much of what the relationship between the ANC, and I'm here talking largely about the key leaderships within the ANC, not necessarily all of the rank and file, because there's been contestation, with that business has been in the form of, for example, black economic empowerment. So most BEE programs have been as a result of people getting into big business, getting shares in business. That's how Cyril Ramaphosa started. That's how Tokyo started. So from the very beginning, the whole notion of economic empowerment was married to a relationship with big business and corporate capital. That was the beginning. That laid foundations for then you look at, for example, the ANC itself. It started, and the unions and the alliance partners started their own investment companies. They started playing the game. They started buying shares. They started becoming, whether it was Chancellor House in Hitachi, Africa, for the, getting a 25% stake of a multi-billion rand tender for the Medupi and Kusile plants, or if it could be a whole range of other industries where there have been tenders given to politically connected individuals and businesses. And in fact, the ANC has basically said that this is their program. They want to create black capitalists. They want to create rich people, and they want to deracialize the economy. The only way they've been able to do that is with a close relationship with business. And so what I argue is basically, if you look at that relationship, over time, that has had fundamental impacts on the politics of the ANC. They have been shifting towards basically a political relationship that is not in opposition to business interests. In other words, where they're coming together. And that has created a situation in which much of the state, I argue, has long been captured. When they talk about state capture now with the Guptas and Zuma, this is just a small example, in my estimation, of the latest thing. Corporate capital captured the ANC in the state long time ago. And as a result, you can see in the economic policies that have been followed, in much of what has been done by the ANC government, has been in the interests of not only corporate capital, but also in the interest of those within the ANC who want to become wealthy, who want to become big business players.
Is it not important that the ANC work with business as well as other players like Labour in order to effectively manage South Africa's mixed economy?
Of course, there's no question, and I'm not making the argument that, of course, that the ANC doesn't have to have a relationship with corporate capital. Of course, it has to have a relationship. The question is, what kind of relationship does it have to have? Now, this is what a democracy is all about. People voted the ANC in on the basis of particular political manifestos. What were those manifestos right from the 1994 onward? It was to basically deliver equality and justice from an apartheid past to the majority of the population. We were inherited in 94 a situation of gross inequalities on racial grounds, on economic grounds. A very small minority of individuals basically running the show. And owning most of the land, owning most of the industries. Now, the question is, if you're going to then say to corporate capital, okay, we want a relationship with you, but we want a relationship that is going to make sure that over time, we are able to deracialize that economy for the benefit of the majority, not for the benefit of a small minority who then gets brought into the house, as I say in my book. The political landlords and the economic landlords make a very cozy relationship, and the people get left behind. So it's not a question of having a relationship. It's a question of saying, was the ANC true to its manifesto? Was it true to its own people, the people that voted for it? Corporate capital didn't vote the ANC into power. And yet, So what I'm trying to say is, if the ANC wants to argue that this has to be a realistic perspective, that we had no choice, well then why did they tell the people in the first place that they had other choices, that they could do other things? If they were going to be truthful and honest, they should have said to the people, we can't distribute, we can't nationalize land, we can't really deal anything here. All we can do is deliver a few RDP houses and a few other things. The rest that you're just sorry, but it's just going to be the same inequality. 22 years later, what do we have in South Africa? Greater inequality than we had in 1994.
This book is a critical analysis of the African National Congress. Do you think the party will soon lose power? Who do you think will replace the ANC in power?
I do not think that the ANC is going to lose power anytime soon. I think they're hemorrhaging support. In other words, they are losing gradually. We can see this in the local government elections and the national elections. It's not just about the ANC, though. It's about people basically saying that our political system is not servicing them. If one looks, which I do in the book, at the trends in electoral participation, how many people are voting, since 1994 it's going like this. More and more and more people. The biggest winner in the last local government elections were the non-voters. More people didn't vote than voted. Now that's saying something 22 years after people first got the right to vote, who fought and struggled for that right and died for that right. Why are they opting out of a system? I would argue that they're opting out because the ANC, as the dominant party, they've lost trust in the ANC. They've lost a relationship that they used to have. So I think the ANC will eventually lose power, yes. I think that is the democratic way to go. You shouldn't have a movement that stays in power like Robert Mugabe and ZANU-PF for 40 years and nobody can challenge them. You need change, but I don't think that change is going to come about right away. I think the ANC is still the dominant party, and I don't think the DA is going to take power anytime soon. But it's the ANC, if it doesn't correct itself, if it doesn't move in a different direction, if it doesn't begin to answer its constituency, it's going to lose an election fairly soon, yes.
What do you think of the relationship amongst the ANC's alliance partners at this stage?
I think I would call it dysfunctional, completely dysfunctional. I don't think there really is an alliance. I think it's their name only. So the way I look at it is you have an alliance of leadership. So the COSATU and the SACP leadership, and because they're in government. Look at Blade, look at Jeremy, look at all the members of the Communist Party. Where are they? They're in government. They wouldn't be there unless they were in alliance with the ANC. All right? So they want to maintain that alliance. COSATU and most of the ex-COSATU leaders are the same thing. But the rank and file, basically, if you listen to what people are saying, if you listen to the workers, they're basically saying, look, this alliance doesn't function. We say, please adopt pro-worker policies as a trade union. What does the ANC do? It adopts pro-business policies. The Communist Party says we must move towards radical economic what do? They give, Zuma will give a speech about radical economic transformation, but his policies don't speak to that. So I think the alliance is dysfunctional. The alliance doesn't really exist except for the benefit of a few leadership.
You also mentioned that when the ANC entered into the negotiations with the apartheid government in 1990, it lacked specific and comprehensive socio-economic policies for a post-apartheid South Africa. Can you elaborate on what you mean by this?
Sure. So I think basically what the ANC did during the 1980s when it was struggling was it basically said what we're fighting for is to overthrow apartheid. We're fighting to get rid of an apartheid system. Everybody agreed with that. In other words, one person, one vote, the ANC will then take political power. So there was a very well worked out political agenda to get rid of apartheid. But what they didn't pay much attention to was, well, okay, we're going to be in power, but what are we going to do economically? What economic policies are we going to adopt? How are we going to have a land policy? What is going to be our industrial policy? What is going to be our trade policy? What is going to be all the things that make up a country's economic policies? Not much thought was given to that. And so it was when they came into the negotiations, in many cases, what they put on the table was very thin. And they bought into a lot of what as I argue, the neoliberal sort of agenda, which was, listen, don't do anything radical. Don't do any nationalization. Don't follow this is the way the world is. This is how it works. Corporate capital is very strong. You must listen to it. So therefore, just buy into the agenda, privatize basic services, do all these things. Take your trade tariffs and barriers away. What happens as a result? In the 1990s, we have a jobs bloodbath in our country because we can't compete with the big boys from overseas. So basically they didn't think through this. And when people offered alternatives, they rejected them, as I put in the book. So there were economists who offered a serious macroeconomic policy that was produced within the ANC and Alliance in 1991. They threw it in the rubbish bin. Trevor Manuel, Tito Mboweni, and all the rest of them, who then became the finance minister and the first Reserve Bank, basically said, no, we're going to follow this particular agenda. And that agenda was already set for them. So this is part of the problem of what we've had, is we had a failure of political will to implement and to think through the kinds of economic policies that would benefit the majority of the people. Instead, they basically just accepted one that was already there for them.
Despite all the political uncertainty, you also mentioned some positive achievements and progress made under the leadership of the ANC. Can you briefly outline a few?
Sure. I mean, I don't think anybody would claim that there hasn't been some degrees of progress, clearly. One would be we have political freedom. I mean, getting rid of the apartheid system, everything. But I would hasten to add that this is not because of the ANC. We must reject this thing that says the ANC brought us freedom. The people brought us freedom. The ANC happened to be a political party that was able to harness that energy and to represent it. But there were other liberation movements. There were other people that were not part of necessarily the ANC who gave just as much. And it was the people themselves. So I think that's the first thing. But yes, political freedom, certainly one person, one vote. We've had many different good laws passed and legislation passed since 1994, which has to be acknowledged. So many old bad laws have gotten rid of. We've got some nice, we have a really good progressive, socially progressive constitution that was adopted. It's got some problems in it. I think it needs to be, but again, this is a product of this. There has been some service delivery achievements. I argue, though, that those are often overestimated in terms of, the ANC says we've delivered 3.7 million houses. The question nobody asks is how many of those houses are falling apart? How many of those RDP houses are cracking? How many people have been kicked? So, access to water. How many people still have or has those pipes broken? And how many prepaid meters have been put in, so how much can people afford that water anymore? So I'm not saying, I'm acknowledging these achievements. There have been some achievements. There certainly have been some progress. But I think, here's my point. The point is this: what did people expect? And what has been delivered? What has been delivered is the most basic minimum of expectations. What people basically, we expected. I think a lot of people's expectations have been dashed. In other words, we had a lot more to expect. We thought we were going to achieve a great deal more 22 years in, and we look at the situation, we go, yes, okay, there's been some things, but man, if we were going to give this a grade from A to B, we might give a C- or a D, on the grading scale. So, yes, things have been done, but not nearly enough.
You mentioned President Jacob Zuma as directly responsible for the level of corruption we are witnessing in the country. Do you also think that if he steps down, things will change? Okay,
basically I don't say he's necessarily personally responsible. What I say that he is responsible for taking it to another level. So the corruption has been there. Remember the arms deal in the 1990s, the first big corrupt deal. That was under Mbeki and Mandela. There's many different, there's a whole range, and I detail a lot of that. What I say is that Zuma and his crew have taken it to another level. They've expanded the corrupt relationships. They have basically, it's gone into every level. So it's not just about Zuma and what's going. It's at district, local level. Every single tender. Even the small ones, there's some degree of corruption, someone taking money on the side, because this has become the accepted way of doing things. Will his removal do away with it? No, but it'll certainly help. I think there are honest and principled people still within the ANC that are now beginning to realize that if this path continues, the ANC is going to destroy itself and it's going to lose a lot of support. So I think there is the desire to say Zuma is not directly, if you get rid of him, it's not just going to disappear. But the leadership that is enabling a lot of these things and certainly turns a blind eye, if you're able to change that and change the organization, then I think you're going to go some way to doing that. But my argument is basically that the ANC is not the vehicle to do that. I think that as we look to the future, I think there's new vehicles that can be offered.
In the last chapter, you say that the ANC has not practiced what it has preached. Do you think they can self-correct, or is it over for them?
I think that the ANC is in big trouble. I am very, very skeptical whether, people used to say, they can save the soul of the ANC, or, you know, this has been going on for a long time. I think the ANC at the moment it would take a great deal of change for it to correct itself and get back on track. I think it's like an elephant that has been wounded and it is staggering around the place. It's not going to fall for a long time, but it's going to do a lot of damage in the process of staggering around and people trying to do these things. So it's not as if there's an imminent demise of the ANC, but I don't believe the ANC is the future. Let me put it that way. I think the younger generations in this country are going to create new vehicles, new things. Yes, the past, but we can't live in the past. You can't live on the glories of these things. New political vehicles must be created. I think it's going to take some time, but I think the ANC will be superseded. And I think many in the ANC will be part of that creation.
That was South African activist Dale McKinley speaking to Creamer Media's Polity about his book titled SA's Corporatised Liberation, a critical analysis of the ANC in power.